India could actually make Russia's 5th-generation Su-57 Felon much better. Maybe. I've been pretty hard on Russia's so-called 5th-generation Su-57 Felon in the past, mainly because it's barely a 4th-generation aircraft as far as capabilities go. But if India imports Russia's Felon and adds their own Indian radar and sensors and mission software and EW gear, well, the Felon stops being a paper tiger and starts being dangerous. Hey friends, Wes here, Army and Air Force veteran, international relations degree, Juris Doctor, and
I feel the need for speed.
So this idea hits a nerve because you and I already know the base problem. Russia built a 5th-generation aircraft that's spent the Ukraine war playing standoff quarterback instead of kicking down the door. That tells you what the Kremlin believes about its own survivability against modern air defenses. But regardless of Russia's marketing, there are some real issues with the Su-57. Engines, weak radar, and the unglamorous physics of stealth that Russia keeps trying to hand-wave away. What I'm saying is, it's not very stealthy. At least not compared to something like the F-22. India, though, also has a history here. New Delhi walked away from the joint Russian Felon effort years ago after a long slow-motion headache over bad engine timelines, capability gaps, and whether the underlying Su-57 design could ever deliver the low observable performance India wanted. So now Russia's back with a fresh sales pitch. Fine, keep the airframe, bring your own brains. Here's the complication though, even if India could bolt a smarter radar and better mission systems onto the Su-57, that doesn't magically turn it into an F-22. Stealth isn't a software patch, it's shaping, materials, manufacturing, tolerances, inlets, edges, seams, coatings, and the boring stuff that's expensive to do correctly at scale. Now, I've been blunt for years about why the Su-57's low observable design choices, especially around things like engine face exposure and overall shaping compromises, keep it in a different category than top-tier stealth platforms. So, the real question is simple. What can Indian sensors realistically change, and what can they never change? Well, let's start with what India could try to replace, because the rumor only makes sense if the starting point is the Su-57's current sensor stack. Open source reporting describes the Su-57's radar as the NO36 Yelka family, a nose ASA plus side-looking arrays plus L-band arrays and the leading edge extensions that can support IFF and electronic warfare functions. On paper, that sounds impressive. Multiple arrays give you wider coverage, more options for electronic attack, more flexibility in how you build tracks. Now enter India's pitch. Replace the Russian junk radar and key avionics with Indian-developed systems, likely centered on DRDO's Uttam ASA family and the more ambitious Virupaksha concept discussed in Indian defense circles as part of a broader modernization effort. If you strip away the bravado and look at it like an engineer, India would be chasing some real practical gains here. Better detection and tracking reliability in high-clutter environments with their own homemade, domestically produced modern ASA with strong processing and smart modes that could pull targets out of noise more consistently. That's less about raw bragging and more about track quality and track persistence. The other thing India brings is better electronic protection and electronic attack integration. The radar and the EW suite don't live in separate universes on a modern jet. They share threat libraries, timing, waveforms, and mission computing. If you can fuse those pieces cleanly, you get a jet that sees earlier, classifies faster, and survives longer when the sky turns hostile. Russia's junk software and radar systems are garbage at doing that. India can do it much better. Then there's better sensor fusion and pilot workload reduction. The deadliest fighters don't win because they show pilots more information. They win because they show pilots less junk and more decisions. Mission software and fusion logic are where a lot of Western advantage lives. Then India can bring sovereign upgrade control. India loves upgrades it controls because it's tired of being held hostage by foreign timelines and foreign politics. A locally owned software pipeline means faster iteration, faster bug fixes, and faster adaptation to real threat behavior. And that last point matters because India has experience doing deep integration on Russian airframes. The Su-30 Mark I is basically a case study in Russian metal Indian and Western brains. The idea that India could do something similar on an Su-57 isn't science fiction. It's the same playbook, just on a harder platform. So India could actually make the Su-57 finally deadly. But here's where we have to hit the air brakes, Mav, because the Su-57 radar cross-section and infrared signature challenges don't disappear because your radar got smarter. If the airframe is easier to detect than a true low observable design, well, it's still easier to detect. Some of those Russian stealth compromises, that's the relevant reality check here. So the realistic best case outcome is not Felon becomes Raptor. The realistic best case outcome is Felon becomes a better standoff hunter with sharp situational awareness, stronger EW, and better weapons employment. And that's still dangerous because air combat isn't only stealth, it's detection, track quality, jamming, missile energy, and the tactical geometry of who sees first and who gets forced defensive first. A jet with mediocre stealth can still be nasty if its sensors and electronic warfare let it shape the fight. So how would India actually make the Felon more lethal? Well, they would tune it for the kill chain, detect, classify fire, and then keep the missile supported in a hostile EW environment. Indian mission software could prioritize multi-sensor tracks, push cleaner target solutions to the cockpit, and improve cooperative engagement with other platforms. Even critics admit that integration quality and software maturity often decide whether a great sensor is a battlefield asset or just a spec sheet. India would also pursue weapons compatibility. If India insists on integrating its own air-to-air missiles, data links, and electronic warfare techniques, then the Su-57 becomes part of that ecosystem instead of a Russian orphan with export restrictions. At that point, the Su-57 Felon stops being a stealth jet in the Western sense and starts being something else entirely. A large, twin-engine weapons truck with modern sensors and a heavy EW posture. That's a different kind of threat. Now, this is where things get fun because Russia's incentives and India's incentives don't align cleanly. Russia wants cash, production volume, and a credibility rescue. It also wants to keep the Felon story alive while the Ukraine war keeps proving that Russian aerospace procurement is not exactly a precision instrument. If India shows up with a big order and modernization demands, Russia gets more money and a talking point. And that's why these India will fix it narratives keep surfacing. India wants capability, it wants leverage, it wants autonomy. If Russia offers deep technology transfer and local production, well, India gets bargaining power against every other fighter option on the table. It also buys time while India develops its own next-generation fighter plans. Now, if India truly could integrate higher-end radar, avionics, mission computing, and EW onto the Su-57E, well, the result wouldn't just be a better Su-57, it would be a spotlight on what Russia couldn't do alone at scale. It would basically say Russia sucks at building its own aircraft. The Felon would essentially become a multinational salvage project with India bringing the parts of the stack Russia had struggled to field consistently. And even in that best case, the jet still wouldn't match the F-22's stealth materials maturity, manufacturing depth, and decades of low observable culture. That's not a political statement, that's just industrial reality. The Su-57 can gain lethality through sensors and software while still living in a different stealth tier. For Ukraine watchers, there's also a second-order implication. The more Russia leans into export narratives and future upgrades, the more it signals that its current fleet isn't where Moscow wants it to be. Russia talks like a force that needs a procurement win. Meanwhile, Ukraine keeps turning drones, missiles, and air defenses into an air power tax on everything Russia flies. So yes, India could make the Su-57 more lethal in the same way a great optic can make a mediocre rifle more dangerous. You get better detection, better shot opportunities, better survivability against jamming, and a pilot who's fighting the enemy instead of fighting his own avionics. No, India can't turn it into an F-22 with a weekend software update and a new radar box. But if you want the clean takeaway, Indian sensors could make a Felon a sharper hunter. They can't make it invisible, and they can't give Russia a stealth manufacturing culture it never built. And if Russia's best plan for a deadly Su-57 involves another country showing up with the electronics, well, That tells you everything you need to know about why the Felon has been so cautious in Ukraine. That's it for today, my friends. Subscribing helps grow the channel, and it helps build the best global security community on YouTube. So consider it. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.